Today, no statistics, no math, just stories of the clients we help. You get to eavesdrop on what really happens here starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Today, we're going to talk about the clients we help here at Hoyes Michaels. We're going to tell the stories. Scott Terrio has joined me. Scott, how are you doing?
Good, thanks.
You and I both have the same experience. We're out having dinner with somebody, we're talking, and we start telling them what we do, and people go, really? That's what happens there? I didn't think that's what it was like.
Happens all the time.
Happens all the time. And the most common misconception, I think, is there that, the people you're dealing with, they're all, they have no jobs and no income and whatnot. And in fact, it's probably the opposite. The people we deal with are probably harder working than the average person because they've got all this debt. They got to make as much money as they can to support themselves. So I dealt with one guy, and you met him as well, who starts his day at 5:30 in the morning. Well, he gets up before that. He's at the gym at 5:30 in the morning because he's a personal trainer. He trains a few clients. Then he goes to his regular job during the day, and then in the evening he's driving for Uber Eats, whatever. He's a hard worker. He's gotten stuck with a bunch of debt for reasons we won't go into. That's a pretty typical type of person that we see here.
Yeah, I think so, especially in the last year or two where, the gig economy has come into play a lot, right? So you get people juggling jobs. They've probably got families. They got kids that got to go to school and come home. And so if you think about it, I mean, I come into a job and work, work my day. So do you, and I go home. But I can't imagine trying to juggle that kind of schedule. And it isn't even people with multiple jobs, but the stress load that these people are under too. I mean, I've only ever met and signed people who had good intentions. Really, very rarely do you get a situation where somebody says, "Okay, I'm just going to run up a bunch of credit card bills just for fun." Nobody does that we meet.
Yeah, and if we did meet them, we'd say, "Yeah, sorry, we're not. That's not what we're here for. We're here to help the honest guy, not the crook." Right. And part of it is the cost of living. Certainly here in Toronto, when we're recording this at our office at Yonge and King, right in downtown Toronto, it's wicked.
Yeah, and a lot of this is the theme of what's happening. I just talked to somebody this morning about this. You can trace a lot of the financial and debt problems that people are in right now because of what's happened with the housing market in the last decade. I mean, it's just housing's not something you can get away from. You have to live somewhere. And if the entire market is up significantly, nobody's making 40% more income or 60% more income, right? So I think a lot of this can get traced back to that.
Yeah, it's very common for us to see someone paying $2,000 a month in rent.
Yep, and making $4,000.
Yeah, making $4,000.
Right.
So
or $3,000.
Yeah, and $4,000 is pretty good income for a lot of people. Yep. So now, okay, we got lots of people who are paying $1,500 or $1,200 or something, but it's not uncommon that rent takes a huge chunk of what you're making. Especially here.
Yeah,
because your choice is you can either live at the condo 3 blocks away and you can walk to work. You don't need a car, but you're paying $2,000, $2,500 a month. Right. Maybe you've got an extra room. You can have a roommate or something. Or you're living in Hamilton and taking the GO train in.
Yep, and you're spending 3 hours a day commuting.
Right. So you're and again, I've got clients who are in both of those scenarios.
Yep.
And which is better? My rent's a lot cheaper in Hamilton. Yep. Not massively cheaper, but it's cheaper. But I'm on the GO train for 2.5
half the
hours
people
a day.
I meet down here at King and Yonge work down here and live elsewhere, and the other half live down here. So we pretty much see 50-50, right? You got people coming in from all of the surrounding areas, or they're living down here in a condo. Right?
Yeah, and so there's no great solution, and they got to kind of pick. And of course, once you have kids, it's kind of hard to be living in a condo in downtown Toronto.
Yeah, it happens, but it's a lot. It's
when
less.
The
I think
kid's
it's probably
6 months
going to
old,
become more common. But
when the kid's 6 months old, it's less of a big deal. But when you got 2 kids and they need a place to run around and that being right in the downtown core is more difficult. So then you got all those costs.
Yep.
Now you have tweeted quite a bit of late about the word renoviction.
Yes.
Talk renoviction. What are we seeing on that?
Evictions and renovictions. So renovictions is where a landlord upgrades a facility. So they own a triplex or something. Let's say a house in the annex where it's split into 4 or 5 apartments, and they decide they're going to gut the entire first level or something, and then they evict you because they're changing the whole house over. And so I have seen people come in that say, okay, my landlord kicked me out. I've been living there for a long time. And in this situation, there's massive sticker shock, first of all, because when you go to rent another place and you've been living here for 12 years, you're paying 12-year-old rent. Well, the housing market has exploded in the last 7 years or whatever. So now you're probably paying twice as much or more. So I actually have people coming in who the last straw that broke the debt camel back, or the being underwater monthly back, is that they don't have first and last month's rent because it's $5,000 or $4,000. Like, nobody has that amount of money so they were doing not bad, and now they got to come up with $4,000. So they went and put it on a credit card, maybe the last $4,000 they had available, and now they're saying, "Uncle, I can't do this anymore," right?
Yeah, we have rent control, somewhat of a complicated system, but we have rent control here in Ontario. But if it's a new tenant, then you can set the rents at whatever you want.
Right.
So if I'm a landlord and I've been renting that place to you for the last 10 years, and you're paying $1,000 a month.
Yeah. I know I'm foregoing $1,500 or more.
Right. It could be $2,000
if you were a new
month.
tenant. Yep.
So I can't just say, okay, you got to leave so I can put someone else in.
Right.
But if I'm going to, if I'm going to live there myself,
or mice, yeah, exactly.
I'm going to move in there myself. So I evict you.
Yeah.
I move in for a day.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I moved in. Yeah, I don't like it anymore. Now I'm going to put it up for rent. Now, is that legal? Probably not, but it's something that happens.
But the problem in reality is now you've had to move out, and are you going to take, 6 months to a year to fight that? Right.
No.
First of all, you're living somewhere else now anyway. So people don't always have the resources to fight something that's not legal.
How much money do you have for a lawyer?
Yeah, you just had to borrow off your
that.
credit card to get first and last. You probably don't have money for a lawyer. So in practical reality, there's not really a way to go after that kind of thing for most people, right?
Yeah, and so as a result, it's like, well, okay, I had to borrow to get my first and last month's rent and to pay for moving costs, and now my rent is higher.
Yep.
Because I'm living at a more expensive place.
And I've heard stories of people coming in where, they have lived in a place for 13, 14 years or whatever. So, like, they're laughing with their rent because they've got, like, a 2-bedroom place that would now be worth twice as much. And landlords are looking for a way to get you out. Mm-hmm. Even a landlord who's good to deal with, responsible, whatever, they want to make more money. Of course they do, right? Like, I have a guy who I used to, he lived on the main floor of a house that my wife and I lived with years ago in the annex. He's got the kind of apartment on the main floor of this house that is like a TV sitcom apartment where you watch Friends and you go, how can those guys making what they're making live in that place in New York? Well, this is the kind of Toronto equivalent. He's not going anywhere because they don't like each other, and he's a lawyer. So she is desperate to get him out of there because she's going to make 3 times as much. So, she's going to find every possible way to get him out of that place, right?
Yeah, which makes for not a great living environment because, of course, they're not doing the repairs. They're deliberately wanting you
They're
out
overlooking
of there,
everything, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes a problem.
And that stuff's happening now, right?
Yeah, and it's a classic example of it's not the tenant's fault. No. In fact, it might not even be the landlord's fault. I mean, what are you supposed to do? I'm still only able to charge $1,200 a month when the rent. I could get $2,500.
They're business people.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, so the roof leaks. I got to fix the roof. It's going to cost $25,000, but I don't have the money because so it's. I kind of side with the tenants here on this one, but I get it.
Yeah, and it's happening.
It's a serious
problem.
And
this is a side effect of a housing market that has gone crazy like this one.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily show up in the stats. So
Right.
so that's one of the things we're seeing. Renovictions. Another thing that you've tweeted a lot about, and there's other people who've written articles about this. Stephanie Hughes has written some good stuff about it. The retail apocalypse.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we all know what it was like when we were kids because you and I are old.
Yep.
We went to the shopping mall. We went to Sears. That's where we bought everything.
Yep.
And of course, today, we go on our phone, go to Amazon, and it gets shipped here for free.
Yep.
So obviously, retail has been decimated in this country.
Yeah.
What are you seeing at the human being level as a result of that?
The fallout is people losing their jobs, obviously. Mm-hmm. If a big traditional department store retailer closes its doors, thousands of people are wiped out of jobs. But then what happens is those people never get those kinds of jobs again, right? So if you're somebody who's worked at a big department store and you have some expertise because you've been in the same department or something for a long time, well, now what do? Okay, you're not going to go work at Amazon's warehouse, who just was indirectly the cause of the loss of your job. So I've met with people who have spent a year looking for work. So not only did they lose their job, now maybe they got a payout of some kind. I'm sure it wasn't great, but I've had people who like they looked for a job for 6 to 12 months because they didn't want to just take anything. They wanted to get something hopefully in their field, or at least to make kind of what they were making before, but they never do. Like they're making 60% of what they used to make now after being off for a year. Can you imagine the steamroller effect on, you had to use credit to make ends meet for a year. And so because of the retail apocalypse, you have people who are now like they're skilled, but there's nowhere for them, right? And they've run these debts up because the interim was so tough on them, right?
Yeah, if you worked at Sears for 20 years, you obviously went up the pay scale, so you were certainly making more than minimum wage.
Yep.
Well, now you're 40 years old or 50 years old or 60 years old, so kind of hard to be getting an entry-level job somewhere else, even if the job is available, because, well, you're now older than that kid I can hire.
And now they can hire somebody who's 24 and pay them half.
Right.
Yeah.
And particularly in retail, if there's, well, you're going to be moving boxes and, we want the young kid.
Yeah, because it isn't the
person.
same structure retail anymore,
No.
right? Like these people have gone from this massive department store, which is a big company, and now they're working at a very small retail, possibly an independent, right? And so you kind of do anything, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and you talked about I get laid off because I'm using the example of Sears here. They closed down, so there's some kind of severance or something. So I don't have to find a job immediately. Right. But of course, now I'm competing with everyone else who worked at the same place. Yep. What do I do to make ends meet? Well, maybe I'll tap into my RSP.
Yeah, exactly. So now the people that come in have depleted all kinds of these assets. They've run their credit up because they've had no choice, right? And so they're in, kind of 10 times as much mess as they otherwise would have been. And they've taken a job where they probably don't have benefits, or maybe they do, but no pension.
Yeah, and when you cash in your RSP, there's the tax implications.
Exactly.
So which don't hit you right away. I go to the bank, I take $5,000 out at a time. I only have to pay a 10% withholding.
Yep.
But then at the end of the year, I file my taxes.
So double whammy. So now another line item in your proposal or bankruptcy is, a tax bill of some kind.
Yeah, which I hadn't anticipated. I mean, I kind of knew conceptually that it was going to be there.
But when you're desperate and you gotta pay bills,
what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
I gotta get the money.
And none of this is the fault of the person, right? Like, they went to work for 20 years, they did a good job, and then the company closed down. So everything that happened after that, they're just doing to try and keep up. And it's through no fault of their own. So again, we're back to there's no deadbeats in this situation. These people are hardworking people who happen to be in a bad situation at the wrong time.
Well, and if someone had come in here 10 years ago who was doing fine working at Sears, what advice would I have given them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, how do you avoid it?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would have said live as frugally as you can, try to put as much money away because at some point you may find yourself unemployed.
Right.
But... Okay, it's Sears. It's been around for 100 years. It's Nortel. It's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
So, okay, I guess you should do your best to anticipate it.
Right.
But it's not as easy as
that's a tall ask, right? It's
well, and the other one that's my pet peeve, of course, and we've talked about this on the podcast many times, including our I guess the second week of September, the student loan show.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And as this is broadcast, we're in the middle of an election campaign, so which student loans don't appear to be even anywhere on the radar. But it costs a lot more money to go to school now than it ever did. An undergraduate education, if you go just down the street to Ryerson, U of T. U of T basic tuition is $9,000 a year. $9,000 a year. And of course, we already talked about how much it costs to live in Toronto. Even if you're staying in residence, you're easily then paying another 10 grand for living expenses. 20 grand a year. There's no way you can get a minimum wage job and make 20 grand.
You're not making that from your summer job.
No.
And so the people we're seeing, and it's happening a lot. I mean, if I see 50 people in a week in this office, I would say 10 or 20 of them for sure have student loans. And they're all, it's different ages, right? It isn't just young people in the 20s and 30s, but it's older people who still haven't paid off their student loans from when tuition was only $5,000 a year instead of $9,000. But now the problem is they've got this anchor around their neck, and they've had to use other credit in order to, manage to live in this expensive city. And some of them we can help with student loans, some of them we can't. Because if the student loan is over 7 years, we can put it in your proposal, your bankruptcy. If it's under 7 years, we can't. But at least the rest of their debts are. And so they go from paying, 1,000 minimum payments a month to 200 or 300 in a proposal. So at least they got better cash flow, which will allow them to handle the student loan that I can't put in because it's too young. But it's happening a lot. And they're working in the gig economy, right? So it's not like when you and I got out of school and we instantly landed great jobs at big companies and, pension plans and all this great stuff. That happens rarely now. And so, you got people who they went to school, they tried to educate themselves, they're working 2 jobs to try and help to cover the tuition. Like, they're working hard. They're not doing anything wrong, right? Trying to better themselves, and yet they're in a situation like this, right?
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is parents, who are, of course, by definition, older than the kids, remember what it was like 30 years ago when we were in university, and it's exactly as you described. It didn't cost that much, and there was a job at the end.
Yeah, and so if you don't know how much tuition is now, and I'm not sure I did until I started seeing this stuff and went, 9,000?
Yep.
And I think we said something, sorry about the stats, folks, but in tuition going up 5% a year or something like that for like the last decade or so, that's incredible. But a lot of older people don't know that. So the instant impression is, they must be lazy.
Yep.
Because how did they get into this situation? Pay your student loans back. Well, it isn't that easy anymore, because now a student loan of 20 grand covers like 1 year or 2 years instead of the whole thing, right?
Well, and I challenge anyone to go do a survey for themselves, go to Starbucks, go to any other place, and see how many of the people there working there have university degrees or college degrees.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's become kind of the basic. You need something like that just to get any kind of job, even if it is in retail or an office job or
bare minimum.
Bare minimum. So I'm a big believer in, if you can avoid school and start working, then why wouldn't you? Unless there is a very clear job out there. But of course, the problem is the people we're helping, it's already over. Like the school is in the past. And now what do? I'm trying to piece it together.
I've had a few people come in who are still students, and the circumstances are such that they had to, for whatever reasons. But generally speaking, they're already long gone. They're in the work economy, and they're doing their best. Yeah. But that is such a massive saddle to have over your head and dragging behind you for years that it's pretty hard to get out from under that.
Yeah, which is why I've advocated that the rule you talked about, where you have to be out of school for 7 years before you can include a government guaranteed student loan in your bankruptcy or consumer proposal, is something that the government should take a serious look at, because that's the only type of debt where that
debt is there a period of waiting like that, right?
It would be ridiculous to do it any other way. Yep. Now, you mentioned the term gig economy.
Yes.
And this is huge here in Toronto. I don't know what it's like in the rest of the province, but give us some examples of the gig economy.
Okay, so the gig economy is where a young person can't get the kind of great job that I got right out of the gate when I left university back in the whatever century. What happens now is you work at Starbucks maybe, or you work at your primary job, but it's like retail. You're not getting paid a great amount.
I get 4 hours a day instead of 8.
Right, and I got to do something else if I'm going to get ahead at all, or even keep up. And so they end up driving for Uber Eats, or they drive, like, I can't tell you how many young people I see who, like, it's almost like that's a given, because they say, and of course I drive for Uber. And it's at the point now where I'm expecting to hear, and you must also drive for Uber, because that's what people do now in their 20s.
Well,
right?
and here in Toronto, Uber Eats, which for those of you who have never heard of what I am discussing, you go on your app and they'll bring you food.
Yeah,
right.
It's Uber, but they bring you food.
Yeah, so they'll go to go to the restaurant.
The person riding in the car is the food.
Yeah, exactly. That becomes the passenger.
Yeah.
Well, and here in Toronto, you don't even need a car.
No,
because we've got lots of clients who do the Uber Eats thing. They do it on their bike. They do it. You
see guys zipping up and down King Street all the time with big things on the back of the bike. It's full of food
all the time. Yeah. So, and it's easy to get a job like that, because all you need is the bicycle and the app on your phone. You fill out some questions. You're logged in, and Uber is paying you. I don't know if it's on a daily or weekly basis, but it's pretty frequently. So if I need to pick up some extra money, that's what I can do.
It's great for flexible people who maybe they don't have kids, right? And their schedules can kind of be whatever they want them. So whether they do it on the weekend or they do it at night, they can take that on as an extra bit of income. Right?
Yeah, well, and with Uber, it's like, okay, well, I'll get up at 5 in the morning and I'll do the airport run a couple of times, and then my kids wake up and I can take them to school and go to work and all the rest of it. Now, that all sounds great, but there's a dark side to this.
Yes.
There's no benefits with Uber.
Nope.
There's no, Well, in a lot of cases, the tax withholdings and whatnot are a little spotty, and GST and things like that, and there's no consistency to it. There's so it's like, okay, I can generally make $50 a day if I do that, but if everybody else is also jumping in,
and that's how they describe it, a day. So so when I'm talking to them and you're talking to them, that's what they say. They say, well, and of course I drive for Uber, of course. And so that's about something a day. And that's how they think. Yeah. It's not like, traditionally you'd say, well, every 2 weeks I get whatever, or every month I get whatever, because it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, they never quote an annual salary. When I started as an accountant, I got the great job out of university. I made $20,000 a year. Yeah. That was pretty good.
And that's how you talked about it.
But I never told anybody I made X number of dollars a day.
A day. No, that wasn't a thing, right?
No.
And the other thing about this too, you may have been getting to this, but I'm going to preempt you, is if you're working 2 or 3 part-time jobs, you're probably, your employer is probably taxing you for the one, right? Because they don't know you're necessarily working the other 2. So you're not being taxed for your overall income. Well, that's what CRA cares about. So you might end up with a tax bill as well on top of all this, because you're underpaying tax here, underpaying tax here, underpaying tax here. And when it comes time to do your taxes, you now have to make up the difference because your overall income is whatever.
Yep. And this is a problem both for
all the time.
And it's both young people and old people, because you're right. Your employer says, oh, well, you're in the 20% bracket. We're taking 20% off. But you add the 3 of them up, you're actually in the 40% bracket.
Right. And by the time you figure this out, it's usually too late.
Right.
Because now you've got a significant enough tax bill, you don't have $2,500 sitting in the bank that you can pay CRA off right away.
Yep.
And then there's penalties and interest.
Yeah, and so it's like, you know what? I'm not even going to bother filing my taxes this year because I know I can't pay it.
Yep.
And so, I mean, after we finish our recording session here this morning, we've got 7 or 8 people coming in to sign proposals.
Yep.
And 3 or 4 of them have tax debts.
Oh, yeah.
And of those 3 or 4, most of them got behind in the filings for exactly that reason. It's like, oh, I had to cash in my RSP. I had multiple jobs.
Yeah, things snowball with tax, right? Like if you don't file, there's late filing fees or whatever, and then you kind of get in the habit of not filing.
Because you haven't done it.
Because you haven't done it. And once you haven't done it for 3 or 4 years, it's like, well, what's the point? And and again, we're not back to, this isn't because people are lazy. It's they don't have the resources or the skills or whatever to know what to do in that situation.
Yeah, if you don't pay your phone bill, the phone company's on your butt within a month, 2 months.
Oh,
Whereas Revenue Canada, CRA, well, it could be 6 months, a year, 2 years
easily.
When you're getting a letter.
Yep.
And
so by the time they notify you, the bill is big enough that, whereas if the phone bill, okay, it's $100 or something I owe you, I can do that, right?
And so I have even more incentive to do the gig economy now, because if I stay at my conventional job, well, CRA knows where I work because they know where my T4 came from. Right. They can garnish my wages or whatever. Yep. So you know what? Maybe I'll just keep driving for Uber Eats, Lyft, whatever.
They can't come and get me.
I'm not an employee there. I'm an independent contractor. So very difficult for CRA to be going after you there.
And I've heard this referred to as, being underground, because you're kind of below CRA's radar, or you're untouchable to a certain extent by them, right?
Yeah, which is what the gig economy is. I'll help my buddy who does basement renovations. Yeah. It's all cash. Yep. I can make pretty good money, actually. Yep. But of course, I have no workers' comp if I get injured on the job. I've got no, EI if I don't have work. Yep. So you're a lot more vulnerable when you're in this kind of a situation.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're seeing a lot of that. Yeah. So final point, and I think we've touched on a bunch of the types of people we help here.
Yeah.
Different occupations.
Yep.
And so it is literally everybody here.
Yeah, you'd be very hard pressed to take a year of my filings in this office and say this is the kind of person that files.
Well, in fact, if we were to just think back over the last 2 months, off the top of my head, I can think of 2 or 3 PhDs who are in here.
Oh yeah, yep,
maybe more.
Who are driving for Uber.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course.
Exactly. I can think of 2 or 3 people who have doctor in front of their name.
I can think of...
And they're not PhDs.
I can think of several who are lawyers.
Lots of lawyers.
Because of where we were.
We're right in the corridor. And you would think, well, lawyers, they make tons of money. What's the problem? Well, again, in many
possibly
cases...
a different podcast.
Yeah, exactly. What happens with lawyers?
Yeah.
But, it's the same as what happens with everyone else. They got more debt than they can handle.
And it's scale. They have... they're making more, but they also
The debts are
live
bigger.
well. And you think about it, if you're at a big firm, there are certain things you got to do, not written down anywhere, but you got to have this
wear a
kind of car.
suit.
You got to live in this neighborhood. You got to go to these clubs, right? And that's expensive. Like when you know, and I'm not saying that I feel badly for that. It's just, but that's the trappings of that profession. And so when you're in it, like they went to school for a lot of years and worked hard, right? Now they're in that. Well, this is part of the dark side of this stuff, right? Is that, oh yeah, I'm spending like way more than I thought. I'm making lots, but I'm spending tons
more
because that's all part of this, right?
Well, and we've had a number of people in the dental profession in here, both hygienists and actual dentists. And again, you think, well, dentists make tons of money. Yeah, but they've got a couple $100,000 worth of student loans. Because it costs a lot of money to go to school. And it's not like, well, I'm now a dentist, I'll just open up my own dental practice. That's not how it works anymore. Everybody works in groups. So, okay, there's one master dentist who employs 10 others.
And it's like a factory.
Well,
which I didn't realize.
Yeah,
but
it's the gig economy, but for dentists.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not uncommon for a dentist to work 2 days at this clinic, 3 days at that clinic.
Exactly. They're like a freelance dentist. Almost. It's amazing. I couldn't believe this when I first found that out.
It's very common. Hygienists, same thing. A dental hygienist can now set up their own practice. That's fantastic.
And so they work out of this clinic, this clinic, this clinic, this clinic, but they are their own hygienists.
But they also have to be linked in with dentists, because if someone has a cavity, you got to have a dentist to send them to. And if you send them to that dentist, he's going to say, hey, we'll just do your hygienist stuff too.
And then the issue they run into is back to what we said before, which is taxes. They've got to do their own taxes because they're not necessarily on anyone's payroll. They got their own company essentially, right? So, and maybe you didn't think of that when you were studying to do that, and now all of a sudden you kind of got to be a part-time accountant too, right?
Yeah, so it's very difficult. So you can want to check out the podcast on how to be successful in business. I went through each of those things.
Right, but we're seeing everything.
Well,
self-employed, we're seeing every possible type of profession.
So the final profession I'll talk about, and then you can throw one in, and we'll close the show. Is hairdressers.
Yes,
and I'm bound and determined to do a whole podcast on this because I'm fascinated by hairdressers. And as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm not really a hair guy, but I did get a haircut yesterday, but it's not really my high skill level. But we have tons of hairdressers here. And again, you want to talk gig economy. The vast majority of them are either employees getting whatever hours they can, or they're renting a chair at a big salon. And so they got to pay X number of dollars a month for the chair. They probably have to pay a percentage of their revenue. And then they got to, whatever product is being sold, well, maybe they're getting a little bit of a cut of it, but not much. And if your clients aren't there, well, then you're not making money. So, and every single one who comes in, I ask them, so how's it going? Because I think that's the gauge on where the economy is going. And what they're telling me, and we're recording this in the fall of 2019, is that things are tougher than they were in the past. So people with long hair, obviously not me, but women who have long hair, well, if you've got hair going halfway down your back, you don't have to get it cut every 3 weeks like I do. Well, I can get it trimmed every 8 weeks, every 10 weeks, every 12 weeks. So there are new, apparently there's this thing called dry shampoo now.
Right. I've heard about this.
And I'm not going to explain it because I don't understand how it works, but you spray it in your hair or something. Because, I mean, when you walk from here to Union Station in the underground there's a place you can get your hair blown out.
Blowout bar.
Blowouts, And I don't exactly understand what that is either, but the way it's been explained to me is, well, instead of getting the whole styling done, you only wash your hair every couple of days. You go in there and
it kind of revitalizes your hair apparently. Like it's just like it zaps it and it looks like you've just had it done. I'm going to try that.
We should do that.
That might be a different.
We should also get hair extensions. I think that'd be awesome too. But so the point is, if I used to be able to count on my regular clients coming in every 6 weeks for color and style and cut, well, maybe they're coming in every 12 weeks now because they go to the blowout bar a couple of times. They're wearing their hair longer. There's a new style, I can't explain it, begins with the word B, where you don't actually color the roots, you just sort of gradually implement the colors. So I don't have to get it colored every single week. This is why I got to get a hairdresser on here to do a whole podcast on this. But the point is, in tough economic times, things change. And so you wouldn't think, well, hairdressers, why would they be impacted by that?
But what happens in those times is all of the things that are not critical tend to slowly fall away, right? So, and this is where you get into wants and needs. So, and if you've only got so much money per month, now half of it's going to your rent instead of a third or something like that. Again, we're back to housing.
Yep.
You're going to make small changes here, small changes there, small changes there. And those are the kind of things where when times are good, those kinds of professions are rocking and rolling. But when they're not, boy, all of a sudden you become a choice instead of a necessity, right?
Yep. And hairdressers is an obvious one. Well, that's something I can cut back a bit on.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had a number of hairdressers who've told me, oh yeah, we got a lot of clients who are strippers.
Yeah.
You know, in the adult entertainment industry, I guess is a better way to say
Right.
it. And when times are tough, they're not getting the same level of tips,
Right.
so they're not getting the hair done quite as often. So I guess the message for the people watching is if you work in an industry that is easily scaled back, then and I'm not saying it's necessarily a luxury industry, but anything that can be scaled back in a recession, then that's a potential
Well, because
problem.
when people get into a crunch and get desperate, like I said, you know, anything that's a choice or an elective as opposed to like something I got to pay like my rent, you know, if you're in that kind of profession, then you can expect that times are going to get tough, right?
Well, and I guess if the viewers start seeing you and I wearing man buns because we're not getting our hair cut, then you'll know that times are tough. So at the moment, our hair is short. So
and I don't, and frankly, we're so busy right now. I'm not sure I'd have time to do that. Right?
So man buns it is.
Yep.
So what other job categories, professions do you want to throw in there?
One that I want to mention, just because I want to mention it, and I'm not. It's not going to follow the one that you just said, but I file a lot of people who work at banks. A lot. Now, it's partly because I work at King & Young. Okay, so you swing a cat and there's, 15
3-minute walk from every bank's
exactly.
headquarters.
But I'm not talking about big shot bankers, although we've had some of those. Senior levels, we've had some. But it almost always is very lower level bank employees. First of all, you'd be shocked what they make.
Yeah, not much.
Not much. When you hear about record profits every quarter or whatever, it doesn't make it down to that level. I can assure you, if someone's getting it, but not them. And so I've done enough of these now, working at this office for as long as I have, that it's really a thing. I mean, it's surprising what people are expected to live on, and that's banks. So, and so that's a steady job. I get that. It's a little different from the hairdressing example. But the point is, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, one of the banks missed their earnings. The next day, they fired a whole bunch of people. Okay, like the next day, couldn't you make it less obvious? But I think this is the kind of ruthless economy where, sorry, but, we're just going to let you go. And we're kind of back to the Sears example. Big company, long-time company, like a bank. Obviously, banks making more money, but the point is that isn't even necessarily a long-term position either, because they're not paying you hardly anything at all, or certainly not what the public would think. And then they can pretty much let you go at any time. So very precarious.
Yeah, and banks, of course, are moving much more to an online platform.
Yep, and as more of these non-traditional banks come in, the people that come in here in their 20s aren't banking with the big fives. They're using whatever, and I would predict that 10 years from now, it's going to be a whole different bank environment.
Yeah,
once these 20-somethings become 30-somethings, once the 30s becomes 40-somethings. There's no loyalty to that old model of Canadian banking, right? So
no, I mean, in my life, I've banked at 2 different banks.
Yeah.
I started off at Bank A, which is where my parents banked.
That's what we all did, yep.
And then when I got married, my wife was working at Bank B at the time. So I've been with Bank B since then.
And it is no more complicated than that.
Right.
For most of the people of a certain age like us.
It's inertia.
Right. And yet, when I look at a client who's 25 sitting in my office, they don't think that way at all.
No. Both of my sons, who are obviously much younger than me, they don't bank where I bank,
and they wouldn't think of it.
No, and they both got online banks.
Absolutely,
because they never go. They've never
probably
never been to a teller.
They've never set foot in a bank.
Yeah.
Right?
So unless you have to get a money order for some reason, there's really not a whole lot of reason.
And even then, they probably know a way to do that. Anyways,
it probably is.
Yeah, I'm almost certain that they could figure out a way to do it electronically.
Well, I mean, even if you need to get U.S. cash or something, which is what you used to have to go to a bank. There's lots of machines now that the banks have where you get U.S. cash.
Or they've got it in crypto and they go to a.
It's all in crypto now.
Right.
So
I think that is going to be a very big shift in the way things work in the next 10 years from what I see from people.
Well, we talked about retail, which has gone online.
Yep.
Banking certainly has gone online, and those are two massive industries.
Internet of everything.
Yep. And as a result, people are getting squeezed. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So there you go. There's a bunch of stories of the people we deal with.
Yep.
And maybe we'll do this again because there's lots of more people on our list that we didn't get to talk to.
Well, and we get new stories every day. So, so 6 months from now.
So watch Scott's Twitter feed so you know what's coming up 6 months from now.
I'll try and behave.
Yeah, that's right. And try to behave. Scott, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Doug.
That's our show for today. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.